1986, you see that there's a large increase in the frequency of the fires. So there's about 4 times more frequent, right? So that's the number of fires. The total size burned is about 6 times larger on average. These are again averages since 1986. And these duration, right? The fires are burning longer. The fire season is actually getting longer. It's not about individual fires, but the duration of the fire season is about 78 days longer, and that's from like the first report date to the last control date, right? So this is something that's happening. We're thinking about the air quality impacts. And what starts to get into my own research is a lot of times when we think about fires, we think about the black smoke, right? We think about this billowy black smoke. But there are a lot of components to fire. You can see the black smoke at the top, but you can also start seeing this sort of brownish color. And actually, it doesn't show up quite as well here because there's a light, but it's really a bit brown. And again, there's also this sort of wispy white smoke. And these differences in colors are telling us something about the composition of that smoke. They're also telling us something about the fire intensity. So this black carbon is produced in really hot fires, high combustion efficiency, and this happens sort of at night in more smoldering parts of the fire. And the importance of the colors of the smoke is that these have different constituents, and they have different health and climate impacts. So then there's also a bunch of carbon that we can't see. So there's a bunch of gases that are emitted from particles, and that plays from fires, and that plays a role in the health impacts as well. Okay, so this is a paper that was published in 2016, and the parts of this, I've recreated a graph with pictures from this paper. And what's the importance of, there's several things that I want to point out here. And one is that although we see and think about that black smoke, most of that particulate mass, most of that carbon mass is actually organic carbon. Okay, so that black smoke from a mass-based perspective is not the most abundant constituent in that smoke. And it really is the mass that influences health. The other important part here is just looking at the difference between wildfires and prescribed fires. So I've shown the pictures of the type of, we think of it, you can think of it as a type of landscape if it's not on fire, but we think of it as a type of fuel when it is on fire. So this wildfires in a montane environment. This is a montane, this is scrub land, and this is the southeast coastal forest. And this is the grams of carbon per kilogram of fuel burned. We call that an emission factor. And so you can see here about, on average, this is 24 from this one study. And, the prescribed burn, at least from this particular study, is about half of that, right? And then depending on the type of landscape, the type of fuel, the montane conifer type fires have the highest emissions of organic carbon. But again, this difference between the prescribed fires and wildfires is pretty distinct. And then the other part again is back to that black carbon, organic carbon part. And so about 90% of the mass is organic carbon. One of the really important things from the perspective of predicting and understanding air quality effects is that these PM 2.5 emissions that we're measuring are about 4 times higher than what we have in emission inventories. And those emission inventories are what we use in models to predict impacts, right? So we're really using the fires in the emissions models. And so therefore we're sort of limited in our ability to predict the air quality effects. So my group was really focused on fixing that. One of the things that happens as the plume is transported in space and time is the dynamics, the distribution of particles, right? So that where that smoke is distributed, that you can see the particles, it's a combination of a couple factors. There's dynamics and chemistry happening. So if we just think about the dynamics, the particle mass, the organic carbon mass would just be decreasing because you get dilution. Okay, so you get basically the dispersion and dilution, the particulate matter is going down in concentration. But due to chemistry, those gases that I talked about that you can't see, they're converting the particles. So you actually get an increase in organic carbon mass. And so what we see in the atmosphere when we follow a plume is the particulate OC mass basically stays about constant. It may increase a little bit, or decrease a little bit, and this is that balance between the dynamics and chemistry. And again, just why this is important, this chemical conversion of gaseous organic carbon to particulate organic carbon changes the mass concentration, right? Changes the distribution in space and time, and then again, that influences the health impacts and the climate effects as well. This is generally sort of poorly understood understood. And again, going back to what I was saying in the previous slide, it's just really poorly captured in models. So this is the core part of my research. It's building the measurements, taking the measurements and building the models that allow us to make these predictions about the secondary chemistry and doing a better job of predicting the spatial distribution and temporal distribution of PM, which allows us to evaluate those health impacts. So this is we've been part of this 4-year NASA study, or NOAA study. We're in our 4th year. We've been taking measurements from all kinds of different environments. So we spend a lot of our time at the Missoula Fire Lab sampling individual fuel types and fuel components. This is Watershed Forest in Northern California, where we sampled during a prescribed fire there. And then these are pictures from this past summer where we had an instrument on the NOAA tourniquet. And we also had an instrument on an aerodynamic mobile lab. You can't see it back here. But I just they're all hanging out in the smoke, collecting data. I was a little nervous when I saw the picture. I was like, you look really close to the smoke. To my graduate students. Is that okay? And he's like, oh, it's fine. But they did allow us to cross the line. So I was like, what? But anyway, all in the name of science, right? Okay, so what we do is we collect gaseous carbon on cartridges, and we bring it back to my lab, and we run it using some advanced instrumentation. We use 2-dimensional gas chromatography. And this is where those finger marks come in. So you don't really need to know the details here, but what you can start to see is that these have distinctly different patterns, right? So we see distinctly different chemical signatures depending on the fuel. So this is a ponderosa pine sample, this is a peat sample. So peat has these distinctive alkene signature here. And then the other thing that we see that's pretty cool is we see differences, again, not only in the species, but in the fuel component. So this is the difference between duff and canopy. So this particular duff sample was crazy. It had all kinds of things. So every spot you see is actually a compound. So we've identified something like, we were at 800, and I think we're up to 2,000 individual chemical compounds in the smoke, which is important for, again, understanding air quality impacts. I want to focus a little bit more on just one specific set of compounds that are right here. They're the highest in the ponderosa pine type samples. And these are called monoterpenes, and terpenes are what you smell when you're walking in a forest, that pine smell. If you use like pine sol or any of those, and they smell kind of piney, it's terpenes that are made. A lot of incense has a lot of terpenes. Those are terpenes. And so I'm going to just walk through 3 important findings from this work. Number 1 is these terpene emissions are strongly dependent on the species and component that's burning. So these height of these bars are those emission factors, the grams of compounds per kilogram of fuel burned. And then these different colors are just sort of different types of terpenes. So these are the smallest and these are the largest. But the height represents how much, and the different colors represent different compositions. So again, we see this difference between something like a manzanita versus something like a beargrass. And then, of course, moving into the conifers, it's probably no surprise, but we see a lot higher emission factors for the conifers. We start to see differences in the chemical composition. But one of the things that I thought was the coolest, and we're the first to show this from the chemical species perspective, I would say this is something that I think people that are on the ground and dealing with fires know very well, but we also were able to measure this, is that, the canopy fires have significantly higher emissions, right? So when we're burning these canopy fuels, the emissions are so much higher than like even these composite fires or log stuff and some types of litter. We get a lot of emissions, but. So this is just showing, I showed that you guys don't probably need exactly these pictures, but just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, the difference between canopy and litter fire, for example. Okay. So the second part is when we start thinking, I guess if we go back, specifically get these monoterpenes, so now we're going to dig into that gray bar only, and we're going to look at individual chemical compounds. And to me, even though I grew up in the mountains, those trees, they're the same thing, right? They're just two trees. I'm terrible at biology. I have a degree in biology, but I didn't really get very much more a chemistry person. So I like this middle figure much better. This is the logical pine sample. This is a Douglas sample. And this is actually an average of 70 samples. So we're not basing our results on just one sample. We have about 70 samples. And these are individual different compounds. So what's pretty cool is like in lodgepole pine, we see a lot of this beta-philandrine, and so the bars are the smoke, just to point your attention. The bars are the smoke, so we see a lot of beta-philandrine, we see a lot of beta-pinene, and then in the Douglas fir, we see a lot of campine. What's also really cool, if you notice, is that, you know, one of the questions we've had is, well, are these combustion products? Well, what's pretty interesting is when we plot those with published essential oil data, they overlay really nicely. And so these emissions that we're measuring are probably, you know, happening during a heating phase, sort of like a pre-combustion phase. Some of them get combusted and turn into CO2, but we're able to measure some of these. So it's pretty neat how they track pretty well with the essential oil data. And then if we just take a look at two different compounds here, again, why we even care, besides that this is fun to do in the lab, these different compounds, so these are the same, these are both monoterpenes, this is beta-philandrine, this is campine. Their structures influence the chemical reactivity in the atmosphere. So they react with totally different rate contents. This campine forms 3 times the particulate matter that this beta-philandrine does. So it's pretty interesting. They have very different behavior in the atmosphere. So we think that understanding these chemical signatures is important for being able to predict the air quality impacts. So this is very preliminary data, but I was super excited when I saw that we can actually see this in the field. So everything that I've showed you to this point was lab data, and there's some of it prescriber data, but we actually see this in the field. We see the chemical signatures. So this was the Nescar fire in Idaho. This was Ice Fire in Arizona. I'm showing you, I'm pointing to that beta-philandrine, right? It's indicative of lodgepole pine. And if you look at the fuels report, you see that in the Nescar fire, there was a large fraction of lodgepole pine that burned. And we see this large beta-philandrine signal, and we see some in the Ice Fire, which is expected. So that was really cool. And then we can compare it to other samples, and these are samples from the Twin Otter, so these are samples from the air. And we are comparing this canyon fire in Oregon and this Cal fire in Oregon. And this canyon fire was one of the fires that we measured. It was a largely extract grass fire. And so we really don't expect to see beta-philandrine or lodgepole pine, and we don't see any. This is actually, this is another compound that overlaps. So we see no beta-philandrine, and we see a little bit of a campine signal. So this is the green fire, and these are not scaled yet. This is very preliminary, so they're not scaled with the actual sample volume, so those would look different if we scale them for sample volume, and this orange would be even much higher. So this is the Cal fire, and it turns out that the Cal fire is one of the fires in which fir, Southern fir was burned. So it's really exciting for us that we can see these chemical signatures actually in the field. So I have no idea how long I've been talking. Let's see, it's 6:25. So I'm going to give, I hate to have summary and then have another slide, so I'm warning you that this is summary, but then I have one more slide. Okay, so what we've done here is that we've sampled a wide range of fuels that are relevant to western wildland fires, right? So wildfires prescribe burns, and this is just a Forest Service fuel characterization map. And so I've just tried to highlight, right, we have measurements of these firs and sage and chaparral and these grasses and spruce. And those are all what make up a lot of our traction of the western wildland fuels. We are missing a lot of measurements in these, so we want to do that next, but we haven't. And all of this complexity, this chemical complexity we're capturing in our measurements, but the problem is that it's lost in the air quality climate models. So when I say we measured, 30-some terpenes, when we model that, it's represented as one compound. You just have terp in the model, right? So you treat that on average, and then that kind of misses the spatial, and I said this right here. So it affects the amount and the distribution of PM, which limits the accurate predictions of air quality impacts. And really, I think one of the hardest parts is it limits how well you can assess mitigation strategies. And I think that's especially important in the context of what we're talking about tonight. And so we're developing really detailed models based on what we're measuring. So half of my group are analytical people, and the other half of my group are modelers. And so when we measure these things that no one's measured before, then we work on developing detailed chemical models, and then we develop simplification so we can actually look at what happens in an air quality model. And that leads me to this last slide, and really a list of questions that, as always in research, we think we've discovered something, but people have been studying it forever before us. But the very first thing that I thought of when I started looking at our data was, well, if there's these huge differences between canopy fire emissions and logs, this must have implications for prescribed fires versus wildfires and air quality impacts, right? So that was the very first thing I started thinking about. And again, yes, if you dig into the literature, when you have, and I think it's a little bit misleading to always talk about wildfires and prescribed fires, right? Because really you're just dealing with a range of intensities and a range of what part of the field is burning. So we say that it's overly simplistic to say that, but basically that there are certainly air quality impact differences when you're talking about these huge count fires versus some sort of low-level, low-intensity fires. So we're hoping that our data can help inform this discussion on sort of the relative air quality impacts of prescribed fires and wildfires. We're thinking, what are the air quality impacts? We want to be able to model the air quality impacts of a more active prescribed fire programs. These are definitely going to be regionally specific, and how does that compare with the air quality impacts of wildfires? And thinking about really the co-benefits of fuel mitigation and air quality impacts. So can we get into a situation where we minimize? And one thing I want to say is that, smoke, what we know is PM, particulate matter, because they often get this question. The mass is one of the things we know is just bad for our health. So it's not totally necessarily true, right, that one kind of smoke is better or worse than the other, right? We know that PM mass is bad for us. We do know this. That said, there's a lot of indication that, like, when you add burning houses and chemicals and things like that to the mix, that smoke is in fact more toxic. So that's something I haven't addressed here, but it's something to think about again when we're comparing this whole mix. So with that, I'll be done.
Thank you, Kelley. We will have a final discussion at the end, but any quick questions for Kelley while we make the transition here?
That's good.
Is that good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Your name's not up there.
Attendee.
Oh, it's an
I didn't put
attendee.
my name up there, so.
So you have.
Next up, we have Brad Piehl, who is I'll let Brad explain what he is. Brad does a lot of things. Brad is a hydrologist with KW Associates. He works mostly up in the Front Range in Sutton County with post-fire effects when it comes to all things water and erosion. I guess your groups over there, a couple that Aaron was, Brad's understatement was a collaborative process, which means that I'm second order removed from you. They learned everything I know from Aaron. So, anyway, with that, I will hand it off to Brad Piehl.
Thanks. Yeah, and to further clarify, I'm a forest hydrologist, so I'm not a college professor, but, and that was really cool. We're going to totally switch now. And one thing that, just to kind of set up, I started working in looking at the impacts of forest fires on landscapes and watersheds in the previous centuries in 1999. And then one of our first study area, assessment area, was where, in 1999, is where the Hayman fire occurred in 2002. Still the biggest fire in Colorado. So I've been lucky enough to do a number of these assessments and planning projects and then have them burn up. And then go back, look at them, and as a scientist, this is about as good as it gets. So we're going to switch a little bit. I'm going to look at, we're going to talk a little bit about pre-planning, pre-fire planning, and then what to do after the fire, so post-fire, pre and post-fire, and kind of how those things can work together. And some of the things I've learned. So we'll look at the upcoming charts. We'll talk a little bit about post-fire challenges, and then kind of what we've learned, and I do this collectively, even though you can hear what I've learned. So real quickly, the upper Kucharas, and if you don't know where it is, you'll understand pretty soon. We did some, this is over by Walsenburg, Levia, and in that valley between there and San Luis Valley, up in the Sangre Risas. And we did some assessment that it's a little tiny, Warfield County, little tiny place, right? Second poorest county in Colorado. They had some people that were really interested in trying to get ahead of, they could see that they had a potential fire problem. So they decided they're going to do something. And so they started talking to some other people, and they're talking to me. We started working with the Colorado Water Conservation Board and did a series of assessments with them that really kind of got them set up. And so this goes through this really quickly. So this is like a watershed prioritization for hazards, post-fire hazards that affect watersheds. On the scale, so you can see there's walls of Riverside. Pueblo is just north of there a little ways. Levita's is Levita Pass here. Those of you who know it. So this is a pretty big scale. If you've been by. Okay. That wasn't.
It's a big scale. Look at that. Someone's like, nah, it's. There we go.
Someone's logging into Facebook Live. Smart Anyway, this is a pretty big scale. And if you know this area, this is like, sagebrush and there's some page juniper and stuff like that in there. So this doesn't really help us as much. So we kind of knew that this was going to be too big of a scale. And then we did this thing to try to identify what we call zones of concerns. These are places where we've got water supply concerns and where those overlap the red. And suddenly now we've got focus, right? So now we can focus in. So now we actually start focusing in on these smaller watersheds. We could talk about this for a long time. I'm just kind of skipping over it a little bit. But so what we ended up doing is focus. This was that red area. Now we've got the smaller watersheds within that same zones. And you can see that now we've got some smaller areas. We can actually start saying, what's the problem? What hazards have we identified in these areas? And it might be a combination of really steep slopes, and really dense trees, and really erodible soils, and too many roads, things like that, all in combination. So we're starting to separate, though. We're starting to separate out on a smaller scale. So these are like a couple thousand acres. Now it's something that we can start thinking about. What should we do before fire? Here's a zoom in model now. We can start looking to see some of these watersheds. And then this is a sediment transport and deposition analysis, so really kind of a quick course one, but it helps us then start thinking about what kinds of projects and where. And then we went to actually putting some projects on the map. So we actually went out there and said, okay, these areas, we're going to go here to these areas circled in purple here, and we have a whole prescriptions on what to do in those areas. And then we also looked at places where we had road crossings that were undersized. And then we did another project where you can see how this ends up being some pretty interesting work. We did a pre-fire planning for post-fire sediment basins. So, we've had some success in some other fires where we've put sediment basins in after a fire in selected locations, and they've stopped a lot of sediment debris from getting into the main streams. So we actually did some of these little triangles, and they were all ranked as to what status they were, whether we liked them or not, or whether they needed more work or not, and put those on the landscape, right? So now we've got all this stuff in place in this little place, and then so here's that assessment area again, and then of course, what happened? Like you guys know what happened last year. Happened there too. At Spring Creek Fire, the second or third largest fire in Colorado. This is 108,000 acres, big fire, and it had probably, I think, I would argue it had the highest percentage of high burn intensity or severity of any fire we've seen in Colorado. So, and primarily it was due to weather and vegetation type, the whole combination of them. Now, again, you can see here's my scientist part. When this happens, it's kind of like, take me to do the post-fire stuff, because this is going to be fun. I'm going to learn something to go down there, and we are doing that. We are working on post-fire. I was just up here yesterday, Paradise Acres, not quite so much anymore, unfortunately. The bad side, I say this is interesting. There's something like 35 homes burned up here. So that's kind of the sad part. But you can see when these forests get really dense, these whole hillsides, most of these hillsides are all high burn severity. They're just experiencing a lot of soil loss, and peak flows are just tremendous in this area. All the roads and some of the houses actually have experienced post-fire runoff, something that they just don't even understand. And then we also have, you can't quite see it here, but this part on the soil, this is a lodgepole plant forest burn. And it has some hydrophobic layers on it. So in high intensity fires, you get enough heat. What happens is the soil, the organic matter that's sitting on top of the soil, so the duct, the organic part of the duct that's sitting on top of the soil volatilizes, and some of it starts settling into the soil, and then it cools and then it solidifies again, and it coats the soil particles so that water can't penetrate. And that's where you get the hydrophobic component of it. Sometimes these layers are really fragile. They break apart pretty quickly. Sometimes they stick around a little bit longer. But we know that where we've seen them and we've had rains afterwards, you can have a lot of soil erosion and a lot of runoff from these. So this is a pretty steep slope. So this is right after the fire. There's a bunch of ash around. No erosion really has happened yet. One of the other things we identified immediately after the fire was this is right above the town of Lopita, this little tiny town. There's 3 of the major watersheds that burn in the fire, all converge and go right into Lopita. So, you can see this culvert here. There's actually another one over here. These are 2 36-inch culverts. This is a small little drainage. They're totally full. You get so much debris and sediment coming through these post-fire that these probably were adequately sized culverts, and now they're not anymore. They're non-functional now. This bridge, and when it turns in here for perspective, right above Lopita, is about half the size of what it should be post-fire. Right? So these are some things that we need to think about beforehand. Quick analysis that we did right after the fire. this is so that you don't really have to pay too much attention to it, but the colors are kind of nice. And so these are all the different crossings right about town. And some of these roads that burn, and these are the flood, the intensity floods. So how big they are? You know, the red ones are ones that won't pass. You know, the green ones are ones that will. And if you happen to notice the title, this is pre-fire. This is before the fire. So in other words, most of the, and this is true, anywhere you go out there in the forest, most of our road crossings are totally undersized before fire. So post-fire, what happens? You know, this green one really, it's an anomaly. I probably should take it off of there. But basically, you know, nothing works post-fire in these situations. And part of that, and we're not even accounting for the debris, which there's a lot of debris if you've seen post-fire runoff. So one of the things we really need to do is look at roads. And one of the things we can do is look at roads before fire. Right? Because we can replace some of these crossings and make them much more functional. So this is just something we did last summer after the fire. Oh, again, and so you can see now, you know, we've really concentrated. We're prioritizing based upon a variety of different factors. And so now, instead of looking at 108,000 acres, what do you do with 108,000 acres in limited funding? You have to focus. So we're focusing in on the ones that we think have the most hazards and that are in positions where we're going to cause the most damage to downstream values, whether that's water, people, infrastructure, things like that. And then that then informs what we do on the landscape. And so again, this is something post-fire. This is from this year. Another one of these. This is actually a mixed conifer stand that, and if you understand, there's a lot of mixed conifer there. A lot of times they're pretty dense. Again, nothing growing there. And then some of them had an aspen component. And guess what? This is a high burn severity, same situation as the previous slide, but there was an aspen component, and the winter and the spring we had was amazing. There was a lot of water in the landscape. It was cool. And guess what? You can like barely walk through all that aspen in some of these places, and this was high burn severity. Not without its, I mean, this looks great, right? It's totally green. We're looking sideways. Some of these places look like this when you look closely. So aspen, you know, little baby aspen, right? Their stems are, you know, about as big around as your pinky finger at the most, probably half that size. And that's all the ground cover they have. So they really don't cover the ground very well, and you still end up with this kind of erosion. So this is pretty significant erosion. And we still see it. So what have we learned? Well, as I said, when you're dealing with some of these big fires and limited resources, you really have to decide how you're going to prioritize and then attack those things first. And some of the pre-fire actions I was talking about, roads, and I'll show you a couple more, they do take a fair amount of time. And you guys know Aaron's been around long enough now to know things don't happen overnight, right? And so some of these projects have to be, it's hard, and it's hard to fund pre-fire actions because you're saying it's going to burn up, right? So it's good just to start thinking and decide. And then in post-fire actions, I think what happens when you're looking at some of those slopes, you have to start thinking about multiple different things. We talked about sediment basins, and you can do seeding, you can do mulching, you can do water erosion barriers, you can do fixed roads. There's all kinds of things, and places where you have those red watersheds and you have a lot of hazards combined with values, I think you should just throw as much of the book as you can at those places. And then building support, I'm a real fan of collaborative action, and I think that needs to happen after a fire as well. Although if you have a flagger set up ahead of time, it sure helps a lot, because they're hard to form in an emergency after a fire. And be creative. We tend to think too much about using established research and scientific literature, and a lot of times when you go out there in the field, it doesn't always fit necessarily. So sometimes we just need to be creative. And then working across boundaries, it is hard. And one of the difficult things is that we have really divided landscapes. So we've got private land, we have federal land, we have open space, we have other pieces, towns, counties, and the post-fire situation is really difficult because the funding comes from different sources. And we have treated up to lines on the landscape that are different ownerships, and it really doesn't make any sense. I don't know how to solve that one, but write your congressman and tell them to give the Forest Service more money for post-fire, because they're not funding anything in Spring Creek Fire. I didn't say that. So, what do you do, on an individual basis? What happens, right? This is, not only is this a road crossing, this was a little tiny stream. This guy had like a 12-inch culvert there, worked on it for 25 years, right? Now this is blown out, that's about 8 feet tall, and guess what? That's his power line that of course is severed off. He doesn't have that anymore. It's just a small example, but these are the things that people do. And so what ends up happening, you start talking to homeowners who go back, and now they're going to put, okay, I'll put a 24-inch culvert in there. Well, you almost need a bridge in this situation, because, oops, but there we go. Situations like this, what happens is some of these one of the things I've learned, small channels, small little streams, gullies, swales, end up having a lot of water come down. Usually we say, my rule of thumb is if a 2-year runoff event, which is kind of close to an average annual runoff event, in pre-fire, if you look at that same frequency, recurrence frequency, post-fire, you're looking at a 50-year event. What would be a 50-year pre-fire event? So we're talking like, 10 times as much water in runoff and debris. So this is just a little tiny gully. Now it's got, 8 feet tall vertical banks. We see this all over, and water turning down all the time. This is what happens. Be creative. This is another piece of being creative. I could talk about this all night. But we're doing some work with Colorado Springs Utilities. This is Pikes Peak. This is the Pikes Peak Highway right here. These north and south Catamount reservoirs. They're extremely valuable to the city. We're talking about what do we do pre-fire? And we're doing a fuel break along the road and other roads. We're doing fuel breaks on ridge tops. And then these yellow areas are places where we're doing aspen enhancement and created openings. And then we're also doing some riparian enhancement, because we know that intact functional riparian areas help a lot after a fire. So we're really trying to be creative, but do some relatively intense actions, but still work with what we think the ecology of the place supports, because we know we can't just like go cut all the trees down. It doesn't really work. I live in Summit County with the Brad Piehl, and the Forest Service did a whole bunch of clear cuts. Guess what? We have now, 10 years later, now they're all like really super dense stands of young lodgepole. So now we got to deal with that again. It's not like you can just cut your way out of this. I think you have to be creative and work with the landscape. That's my last slide. So that was a lot of information. We'll be around for questions.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Kelley. Be creative. That's something we're really trying to do here in Southwest Colorado. Who, just as a kind of show of hands here, is aware of the End River Community Forum? Some people should know this. Maybe. So the End River Community Forum, it was one of those entities, was formed post-disturbance. In this case, the Gold King Mine release still everyone can find that. And it's kind of retooled itself now as a Post-416, looking at post-fire protection for 416 as part of one of its, graduate, missions going forward. I think that's the correct way to say that. So we have collaboratives here locally looking at post-fire effects. We have now 4 different collaboratives here on the San Juan, one focused in Dolores, a new collaborative focused on forest health here in La Plata and San Juan counties, and a forest collaborative based over Pagosa Springs. They're more of a regional collaborative looking at this, San Juan and northern Mexico. So being creative, we have one of those pieces in place should things happen to respond to those. With that being said, one of the things I want to do this evening, kind of keep a little bit different than the last 2 events. We'll have a panel discussion, so we'll bring our speakers up and we'll have Aaron Temple join these guys for about a half an hour. And then for the last half hour of this evening, we're going to open it up to more of a dialogue between us and you as the community. So we'll take a little, let's say, 10-minute intermission here, so we'll be back in seats 5 after 7. Bathrooms, beer, snacks, etc. But while you're out taking care of things, think about a couple of things for both our speakers and for our discussion later on. So kind of one of the driving questions for this evening is, what do you feel as community members we're currently lacking when it comes to either your understanding of how we respond to wildfire, how we deal with smoke, how we utilize fire as actually a tool to help mitigate, severe fires. So a lot of prescribed fires happening here in San Juan currently. And what ideas do you have to be creative, to think about, what are your aha moments over the past couple of years here? Some folks might have been here during Missionary Ridge. Some folks, I'm assuming most people in this room were here during the 416 last year. And a lot of folks, I'm sure, have experienced a lot of smoke this summer from the fires we're potentially setting before us. So think about that while you're taking a break, and we'll be back here in 5 after, so 7 to 5. Thanks, guys.
That's the other component, right? It's not just air, but it's water too. It's what everything. There's different uses. It's always good.
Yeah. I know. Well, it's good to meet this time.
Hey, should we move some chairs? You want to sit some chairs?
Yeah, 3 chairs and then we grabbed it. But I don't think we need to grab it.
This whole thing is so interesting.
Thank you for being there. He's like, it's huge. I don't know.
That's huge.
Your daughter always does wonderfully.
Oh, thank you.
Brains up, flash away. He goes back, brains up, flash away. Just like, been doing that for a while. Yeah, just have to be like, you know, where else. Yeah. It's not a small road. As well. Water quality. Very secret. Not like cash.
So that
The break is not. This is what you do with your time away from the talks?
Yeah,
All right.
that's why I went to grad school.
I know. Good for you. You did great work.
I don't have anything. I mean, I got it. That's a team. Oh, just good. Yeah.
I really enjoy.
Oh, look at that. We do get a table.
Yeah.
I was feeling a little exposed.
Sorry to feel that way. Are we all done?
Actually, I think we are. No, we'll need a ladder.
Now, let me see, that's why we bring in.
Someone's got their, just a little.
And the game was
If only.
You got it, Mandy.
Oh my God, I'm kidding.
I think I.
Anything else? Real problems?
Other Brad. Yeah, Brad. Yes. Brad. Professor Brad. Well, we did bring things in. We're good.
Should we get rolling?
Sure. Yeah, I might even
All right, that's enough out of you. Enough playing.
Time to go to work.
I think we need to private bear. I agree. Well, I mean, I agree.
All right, folks, we're gonna restart here. On your seats. Yeah. What's your perspective? Like, how am I introducing you? You're going to get a collaborative perspective.
Collaborative, local, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, extra I was flossing, that's what I mean, that's how I am. Not very well.
I can't.
Yeah,
Well, if I do all of it together, it doesn't work. I feel like think about it. Yeah, I just do that. Like, go that way. All right, we're going to go with our panel here. So those in the back, I'm going to come sit down. Not keep your conversation going. So introducing the mix here is Aaron Kendall. He is the program director, aka my boss, at Mountain Studies for the Forest Program. Aaron will be speaking from both our collaborative and local knowledge perspective when it comes to how we are thinking about fire here in San Juan Mountains. So, I think of a great question to start off, you guys. Does the audience have an awesome question to lead off this conversation with?
Yeah.
So Brad mentioned this as part of this talk, but what's the purpose of planning or third thing, I forget what you said, the replanting of aspens in forward areas?
So we generally don't, we are working on a program to do some replanting, actually from seeds, which is interesting. With the Nature Conservancy up in Summit County, we're doing a project like that right now, but most of the time what we would do is look at a hillside where we've identified it being a hazard, and then find places in like a mixed conifer stand or a lodgepole stand or something like that, where there are some aspen trees now, even some small ones. And then basically you just cut all the conifers out and cut the aspens down too. And aspens love to be cut down, and they can sprout back like crazy. So that's one, and it really fits in our ecological context because we're lacking basically a lot of ecological disturbance in our forests, and aspen are usually they're the pioneer species, so they come back right away after disturbance. And so my perspective, a lot of other people too, is that we really have a much smaller aspen component than we used to, or that we should have.
The other thing is that, so yes, aspen are the species that come back. They're kind of our first responders towards stabilizing soils. But they're somewhat, or can be, they're less fire prone, so they can offer a little bit of a fire break in the wrong conditions, large drought conditions. May not still resonate, but they come back quickly.
I should call it for aspen there. So Dr. Barsanti,
you're looking at all the conifer species. Do you have anything to comment on as far as like aspen stuff?
No, we haven't, that's one of the fuels, and maybe it's also, this idea of prevalency, right? So we've been focused on when we think of our prevalent Western wildfire fuels, right? And so aspen trees are not typically in our mix, and it could be because that is which seems to be, but we have no measurements. And I guess I should say that maybe when we were sampling this summer, it could be in our mix of the forest that we, that were the wildfires. We have no idea. We're missing a lot of the non-coniferous fuels or non-shrubby fuels. So keep trying to get an opportunity to measure those, but so far not haven't.
So, Dr.
Kelley, just Kelley. Only if you're an undergraduate student in my class and you're being sassy.
So I noticed that you talked a lot about terpenes and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was more like the terpenes rather than the particle size of the ash.
Yeah.
How does the terpenes that we actually smell when we have a forest fire versus the particle size of the ash differentiate air quality?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So one of the things that I'm interested in is how much of that gaseous material that we can smell like in a forest, not necessarily in fire because we're smelling other things, how much of it converts into those particles. So I'm interested in the chemistry of those molecules, and alone, everything's a toxin, right? It's just at what level. So alone, those terpenes aren't going to do, they're not harmful to your health unless ingested in massive quantities. So we're not so worried about the terpenes alone, but what we are interested in is how and when they contribute to that particulate mass. Because what can happen is basically as, for example, at night, and a plume will settle, and you can get a lot of nighttime chemistry, and then you've changed the amount of mass. You have more mass because of the chemistry of these kinds of terpenes. And if we think about what would happen to fire in the absence of chemistry, the smoke would just dissipate, right? So you have your very localized health impacts, wherever that plume is directly being transported, but there's not going to be those sort of longer health effects that, the fire's burning for a long time. So we're interested, and you asked about particle size, which is interesting. So most of the time, from a health perspective, because mass is easier to measure, we pay more attention to mass. So we're very interested, and that's the regulatory measure. We control, we have limits for the mass of particles in the atmosphere. And we typically ignore size, but it's probably thought that size is important too. In a fire, I think there's so much material and so much chemistry that we don't get a lot. We don't take the really, really small particles.
Going back to Brad, what you were saying about when they were trying to combat the pine beetle in Summit County, they did clear cuts. So to my knowledge of the San Juan with the spruce beetle, they didn't do clear cuts. Was that actually effective, or how did that affect not only the essence coming back, but preventing wildfires and that sort of thing? Can you repeat the question?
Repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, I mentioned that there were a number of clear cuts that were done after the pine beetle epidemic in Summit County, and other places too. But here with the spruce beetle impact, we didn't see a lot of larger scale timber salvage, basically. So I think Aaron can correct me where I'm wrong, but one of the things we saw in Summit was that some of these were right up against communities and houses, and they were actually physical hazards. So the trees were going to fall down on people's houses, on roads, on trails and things like that. So that was one. There are some larger clear cuts there that Basically, what Forest Service is trying to do is trying to change the situation. We've got, I don't know how many, tens of thousands of acres of probably 80 to 90% mortality of lodgepole at Breckenridge. And so what they've actually clear cut is a small percentage of it. A lot of it's in wilderness, roadless, inaccessible. And so we already have a lot of this. And one of the problems with that we're seeing now is that that as those trees start falling down, they create this jackstraw condition, the dead trees. And a lot of times those are really dense stands. So you'll wattle it, and then the trees start growing up underneath. When the fuel component totally changes, the wildfire component totally changes when you get the green needles that really drive the fire in combination with those jackstraw, which is, they're not underground, so they're dry, so it's like a big campfire. And so it's not a fast moving fire, but it's a really hot fire, and it's not something that anyone would send fire suppression resources in to deal with. So it's another long discussion to get from that. There's more implications of that. And so, but basically, we're just trying, the Forest Service is just trying to change the trajectory of some of those places, some of the stands. And that part, the good news is we get a whole lot of lodgepole regeneration. When we have these disturbances. Bad news is we get a whole lot of lodgepole regeneration because they come in. Some places we measured over there, like 8,000 trees in the acre. Going back, it's just way too many. So that's our next problem.
How many of those trees survive?
It depends on the situation. A lot of them, like I was saying, there's quite a few areas where we had 80 to 90% of the mature lodgepole die. So quite a few. And in our lodgepole band in Summit County, and this is what I know. That's where I live. Lodgepole band. Trees, we had trees getting on my back. It really decimated. But it's not so bad. Places where we haven't done any management, some of those are going back as spruce fir, aspen. We're getting a lot more diversity in some of those areas too. So not all bad.
I would say the biggest distinction between the two is the species. So lodgepole pine, very different kind of climatic, not very different, but climatic differences between what we're dealing with here in our spruce fir forest. Hard to harvest, very moist soils, and a lot of water in those systems. So hard to work in there without creating erosion. There are the cuts that you see are kind of what Brad was addressing, right? Where do you see the most cutting? It's actually in the Wolford ski area because of the hazard trees. You're pulling out quite a bit of the trees. And then, of course, there's the big discussion this summer about can we get out there and clear the trails? Can we start carrying chainsaws in wilderness to help clean that? That was a big discussion this summer. I think, again, in our spruce fir forest, it's a little different in that what's going to drive a fire in there is really drought. That's what carries fire in the spruce fir forest. Mike Brent talked about that last week.
One thing on that we do see recently is over on the Riverside, Gunnison on the Watershed Planner, it's a project called SPEED, which stands for Spruce Beetle Aspen Mitigation, something, it's a terrible acronym. But a lot of that work is focused on roads and infrastructure, so actually doing those clear cuts of beetle killed stands away from roads. So if you've driven over between Lake City and Creed of late, you'll see a massive swath of trees come down. And that's something that, potentially, given the trajectory of spruce beetle here in this neck of the woods, we might be addressing in 5 or 6 years.
And just one quick note too.
Either going over Wolf Creek Pass or going to visit Brad's house, there's a lot of green what was 8% dead. There's a lot of, so the forest is coming back. Just looked terrible there for a while. Like, nobody appreciated it.
Darn beetles.
I have a couple of questions. Try to start out. First one's for Kelley. You talked about having an analysis and modeling team to look at the differences of air quality effects between prescribed fire and wildfires. And so I'm curious, are those models in use or are they still in development phase? And if they are being developed, when do you expect to have them being used by different entities?
Those are good questions. So I would say they're in development. So there's a lot, for anyone that studies fire, there's a lot of components. And I will say that we're largely focused on chemistry. And there's a lot of dynamic issues, right? Fire physics, fire behavior. So one thing that's pretty neat is that we recently sort of joined collaborative forces with some really good fire models. So they're really looking at things like how different ignition strategies affect fire spread, and looking at sort of how prescribed fires move. And so what we're hoping to be able to do is take sort of their existing model infrastructure and attach some simplified pollution prediction models. So we always sort of try not to reinvent the wheel and to try to build on whatever tools are out there. I think we, as part of the current project, we would have at least some predictions on not necessarily the difference of prescribed versus wildfires, but I think that what's coming for us in the next year is just how much of a difference kind of chemistry makes. Like if we put this in the model and whatever fires are being modeled, and not necessarily picking apart the differences between prescribed fires, but just what does this chemistry tell us in an air quality model. So different stages, but that's the hard thing about research, right? We're so slow. Right? It's like, what do we, say, my husband's an engineer. Like he's the real engineer and he actually does things. We just talk about it. But yeah, we are doing things and we are working with a lot of people, but it's slow.
That's another question for Brad, I was curious, was that the pre-fire assessment, was that commissioned by the Forest Service? And did it cover both public and private land?
No and yes. So it was funded partially by the local water conservancy district and the county and the towns. We're talking about towns of, Walsenburg's the biggest town in Martineau County, and it's not 20,000 people. They have RVs. They have RVs. Yeah. We got a bunch of pot stores. They may be growing. More ways than one. So they were really, it was a water connection. A lot of the stuff that I've been working with, Aaron's been involved in too, it's really being pushed by a lot of the water providers because they have seen dramatic impacts and they're spending a lot of money trying to do some things. And so the main guy with the Water Conservancy District has got connected with our groups and said, hey, we should do this. And COBCB gave them a 50% matching grant, and then they got a bunch of other partners involved, and they the funding to do it. And it's not that much, and it's not a huge project. So it was good. The Forest Service was involved, and we did do all of our analysis on their land as well, and a lot of I showed you some of those polygons, and we said, here's the project to get you to, and it's kind of interesting, is and that was, I think, in 15 is when we put that up there, and the Forest Service was at the table, and they, of course, and it's a federal agency that moves slowly. We understand that, but so they hadn't done anything yet, but after the Spring Creek fire, I saw the district ranger, and she said, yeah, we're starting to work on getting some of those, looking at some of those polygons, and we're going to start working on it. So sometimes good things happen after a fire.
And the work Brad does is really important, and I appreciate both Brad and Kelley being here. I think they speak to what we as communities need to think about. We do have collaboratives in place. We are thinking about how to prioritize work in the landscape and where it needs to go. Brad brings a modeling component that helps us think through if this happens, how can we think about where we might mitigate some of the impacts post-fire? We all witnessed the 416 last year, and that struck a chord with all the different components of why we live where we live. It hit the aesthetic component, it tapped into our recreational component. Its impacts flowed down the river, impacting the fish in the place in one of our biggest recreational outlets. So that's a really big part of it. There have been several opportunities for our communities and our collaboratives to think about if we had funding, where would we put this work on the landscape? And I think it still needs to be refined, but we've been talking a lot about our community centers, the corridors that connect our communities, what's enveloped in that, if we, kind of buffer out from there, and that includes the recreational areas that we all go to well, some people go there on a daily basis. I'm lucky if I make it out there monthly. But all these places that we love to be. The other, I think, component that Brad hits on is that when we look at fires like the 416 fire, it happens on federal lands. But where does that impact end up? Quite literally in people's backyards, or in some people in their house, for some of them actually pushed right into their house. So we needed to, as a community, start thinking about where we need to work, how we're going to work, and that's where Kelley's conversation is really important, is because we're not taking fire out of the landscape. We have to live with it, but we need to understand what the ramifications are, and what does that mean for us, when there is a fire, there's another impact to our recreational opportunities. It's not great to go out there and ride your mountain bike for 10 miles sucking smoke all day. It just doesn't do it. It takes me all day to ride 10 miles. I don't know about the rest of you guys. But you just got to be aware of all that.
I wanted to ask Brad about some collaborative opportunities maybe you have in the Department of Transportation, maybe some funding they've given you, maybe more riparian areas or more bigger culverts for flows. Like, how have they been involved in your work, or how has your work been involved with the Department of Transportation?
CDOT is not easy to work with. They have their own schedule, and you can tell them their culvert's totally undersized, and they'll, we'll put it on the schedule, We'll have our engineers look at it, and that's about it. So that's a hard one. Some of the roads that they're not associated with, so they're like county roads or forest roads or something like that. We've actually done some pre-fire road improvement projects and some riparian improvement projects. So some of those, going back to the riparian ones, those are pretty easy to do, because a lot of times what our riparian areas need is, speaking again about conifer encroachment, a lot of our riparian areas have seen conifer encroachment, and it's great places for big conifers to grow because there's more water. And as a hydrologist, what have we traditionally done? We've traditionally put buffers around streams and said, don't go there. Leave these alone. These are important places. And so we have intentionally not managed them at all. And so what's happened is the conifers have grown up and replaced cottonwoods and aspen, which really, when you look at streams that have had experienced a debris flow or post-fire flooding, and you have aspen and cottonwoods, they just bounce back. And those things sprout like crazy, and you start catching a whole bunch of sediment and steep street banks, and it's like a no-brainer. So you go and you don't even have to remove the conifers, you just cut them down, and sometimes you have to plant. Cottonwoods are easy, relatively easy to plant. You do with volunteer crews, it's not a big deal, it's inexpensive. Some of the road crossings we're doing now are, if you're gonna do one, you might as well do it right, and it's gonna cost money anyway, so a lot of the ones we're doing now are bottomless arch culverts. And so the good thing about them is they allow a lot of debris passage, they allow the channel to reestablish more of a natural kind of pathway underneath the road, and they have a lot of capacity. So those are really good. They can be, they're not outrageously expensive, but they can be, 150K or something to do one. So if you do it collaboratively, you can a lot of times kind of get some joint funding together, put it on a schedule. But we found it's not that hard to identify these critical road crossings that would be really bad. One's right above houses, one's right above reservoirs, one's right above, or ones that are part of a critical transportation artery or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of roads up there, but some of these are pretty. The first ones to do are kind of no-brainer, really, to identify. So anyway.
So that actually brings up an interesting topic I always like to discuss with folks is, what do you see as barriers to your various fields and various realms, and how do you work? And what do you see as solutions to those barriers?
You know my barriers.
I'll answer that just in the context of the last question. I think that my experience has been that, I got into fire research sort of a little winding path, and then we pursue things with some certain way of thinking, which is that I'm interested in the chemistry, and I'm sort of pursuing this path, and we're building models, but it's a little bit slow. And so one of the things that I've done differently in this last year is, working, I think it goes back to the community building, right? It's working on in a collaborative way and saying, okay, how do we cross lines? So I'm just going to give you a couple of different examples. So one is, I have a project that's starting with the California Air Resources Board, and the first thing we did is say, okay, what are the models that you use? How do you predict smoke impacts for your community? And it's very different than the models that we use in the research context, but the components can be the same. So I have, for my first graduate students, that I'm trying something completely different, and instead of getting really immersed on sort of the chemical engineering kind of things and the environmental engineering, I'm sort of embedding her in the state agency, right? And I want you to learn their tools first, and then you're going to help figure out how we can get our science into those tools. So that's taking this totally different approach. And the barrier is that once you're an academic, you're hopeless. You're so far down this road of academia, you can't be pulled out. But if I can help a graduate student, but not get too big. And then working, with smoke science managers, right? What are the tools that you need? What kind of tools do smoke science managers need? And then we're starting hopefully starting an interesting project. We don't have the money yet, but it would be working with CAL FIRE and working with forest managers. And that is something, how do we combine all of our knowledge bases into new sets of tools that can make prescribed burning, for example, safer, right? How do we use tools to do better fire detection, better escape detection? How do we better predict where the smoke is going to go, right? So we can better plan for prescribed fire. So I think the challenge is developing tools fast enough and having our science inform decision making. That's hard. But I think by building these cross-disciplinary collaborations, we can get there.
And I would like to thank Kelley for doing research, because I think research helps us overcome some barriers, because it can be something we can kind of all agree on, right? And so I think that's really helpful. Another barrier that I kind of mentioned, we talked about a little bit before we started this, is that in a post-fire situation, it's those, ownership lines on the landscape that that really hinder what we're doing. And what we really need, I think, is to have you're familiar with the shared stewardship concept, which is allowing different agencies to work across ownership boundaries. And I think we need that for Post-Fire as well. So that's my plug for that.
I can think of a couple. Yeah. But one that I would say, Brad touched on it earlier, I think it's getting people to think about post-fire conditions before there's any fire happening. That's a huge challenge for folks. In our best world, we don't have a fire. But that's not truly going to happen. So to encourage people to kind of accept sort of that worst case scenario and start thinking that through. I think the other one that comes up a little bit is how do we balance the science that we have now versus the need to get work done now? And what science we might have later. That's a tricky one. And so it's sort of working with the information we have in a very, in a time frame that's short where we need to start moving something forward, but building in some adaptive management so we can learn from what we've done and make sure we've done the right things. And then the other one I would say is funding. Everybody's going to say funding. If you ask anybody, how do we pay for this work? And I appreciate over here Ellen Roberts, who's worked with me for the past year or so on thinking through what an environmental impact fund might look like, or has been an environmental impact bond. And so in the same way that the fire crosses boundaries, the funding needs to cross boundaries. We need to think about how do we leverage our different community components to get the work done in the right places.
Are there current red flags or concerns about insect disease outbreaks down here, as far as spruce beetle or ponderosa beetle or anything like that?
Yes.
Compared to, for instance, the pine beetle.
What? Yeah, I think a lot about this now. So we have several outbreaks here in Southwest Colorado with different species of both trees and insects. We sort of most visible to us is the spruce beetle outbreak that has started over the Springs area around Wolf Creek and moved eastward, westward, and southward, and waiting for so as we're seeing effects of that up in northern Colorado too. That's still ongoing. We will be seeing red and dead trees up around Silver's Head, if not now, in the next year or so. So some major changes in the landscape. There's not, other than climatic luck, there's not much that we can do, collectively can do about that. And so how do we adapt and learn to make those changes and work towards either safety or et cetera on our landscape when it comes to that species. Some other outbreaks are occurring. We have a species called round-headed beetle, which is relative, a cousin to the mountain pine beetle that Brad is referring to, ecological. It's affecting some areas that folks don't have a lot of interaction with, but toward the very extreme western side of the San Juans, past the Dolores. Significant acreage has been affected over there, and it's a beetle that's it's at its very northern extent of its range, and it's behaving very normally. So it's not behaving the way it does elsewhere in its range. It's a beetle that typically burns itself out very quickly, but this has been ongoing, and we're seeing some significant mortality in ponderosa with that species. We also have things like spruce butworm, current river beetle, all around us. It is worth noting that all of these beetle species are native. They're not, some foreign species from Asia that came over on a shipping container and is all of a sudden decimating species. Each of these beetle species has co-evolved with these conifer species over time. And so those are concerns we have and concerns for management, as Aaron was saying, that, when we think about adaptive management, and how do we think we're doing the right thing, but are we doing the right thing? And how do we know that we're doing the right thing long term? And that takes time. Unfortunately, sometimes, as Kelley was saying, it's a slow process to gather that data, that information, to feed that back iteratively in our adaptive management framework, and say, oh, right, we're actually not doing the right thing. We need to change course. We should have changed course 5 to 10 years ago.
I'll just add this. And just one thing to note is that we are still trying to understand the dynamics of these beetle populations, given some of the shifts we're seeing in climate and moisture and temperatures. And so they're behaving a little bit differently. And so we're trying to figure that out. But the forest and the beetles, they've been at this for a long time. And they follow this way.
Why aren't we letting people clear out these fuel sources, like the dead beetle kills, dead beetle kill trees like Wolf Creek and these other areas? Why are we not letting people clear out these fuel sources for firewood in the winter or whatever else it may be to mitigate a potential forest fire? Everyone's just like, we're leaving these dead trees in Wolf Creek, and in 5 years that ski area may not be skiable anymore because a fire can come through there, and next thing you know, we can't ski there. All these trees are dead, and for 5 years you can't ski or bike or whatever because you have all these widow makers that may fall on you and you have no idea. So why are we not letting people clear out these fuel sources?
So the Forest Service has explored that. A lot of it is topography, a lot of it is soil moisture and water, and the erosive component of the soils. And so those are big components. And then we end up very quickly. There's a very narrow belt in that spruce fir around Wolf Creek that is actually not a wilderness or road reservoirs. So they're constrained by the designations in the wilderness. They have done a small sale over there. They tried to go as big as they could with the sale, but given soil moisture and that kind of thing, it just wasn't feasible. The other big thing to note is that spruce fir forest, those dead trees don't particularly change the fire. They change how the fire might occur, but they don't change fire, whether or not we're going to get a fire, to what degree. Those trees right now, it's really moisture. It's drought and moisture that affects the fire regime out there. The other thing we have to keep in mind with the spruce fir forest is that the typical disturbance window, every 150 to 300 years, you'll get a large scale disturbance in that spruce fir. It's the way it goes. As it turns out, that spruce fir forest is about 350-ish years old. So we're right here. We are sitting here at a time when that kind of stand replacing event was likely to happen. We just happen to be here to witness it. And when those stand replacing events happen in spruce fir, it goes big. Because that's how the Westport is not uncommon. And that's kind of the time. It's a little bit different with other forest types. The round-headed beetle in ponderosa pine is a little bit different scenario. And because we're seeing it behave a little bit differently, it's on its northernmost edge. And the Forest Service is currently thinking about what does that mean? Can we use that? Can we use that wood? What are some of the social, ecological, economic components that have in the conversation? So, the big difference is we're here to witness. Now, as far as Wolf Creek ski area goes, they're doing all they can. They're helicoptering wood out of there. They're spending a lot of money on pulling wood out of there because they know that's their business and they're concerned about it. That fire that we had up on the 416, we're going to see a lot of asthma. We're going to see changes in our forests. We're going to see transitions to a forest that that we didn't grow up, that we didn't move here to be part of. And it's just one of those things where we're witnessing some transitions that there's not a lot to do.
Let's do one more question, but I do want to save some time for our group conversation.
Okay, so I don't totally know how to ask this question. It's kind of broad, but I know Aaron's answer is going to be funding. But how do we, so I was here last week and this the other week I wasn't around. There's a lot of great talk about how we as humans deal with fires and spruce beetles, but as an environmental educator, I need good ways to remind people that we aren't the only people, we're not the only animals that live here. Is there any like creative ways to shift the narrative towards, not only has this been happening for millennia, when we weren't paying attention, we weren't alive, but what about the other creatures that live here?
You guys want to talk about other creatures?
Talk about it.
So the question was, what about other creatures, not just humans?
Yeah, how do we think about these disturbances and what we do on the landscape in the context of not just people? And I think, so we do have some challenges, including what Aaron was just talking about, and we saw that in the Mountain Beetle epidemic in Summit County, which is that, they're always around and they've always been there. We had an outbreak in the 1980s, and, it was like a couple hundred acres or something. And so with the climate conditions we've seen, things have changed. Things changed dramatically. Mountain Beetle, actually, there were several years at the peak of that epidemic where they went through 2 life cycles a year. So, ecology is, it's a logarithmic function. It's not just, times 2. And so that was dramatic, and that wasn't something that was predicted in the literature at all. No one had actually seen that species go through 2 life cycles in a year. There's a number of other factors like that. So those things are kind of grab our attention. But what I've always said about what I think we should try to focus on is working with, like I'm talking about, riparian things and aspen enhancement. And these are all things that are aimed towards creating a more diverse ecosystem. And that, I think that definitely works, but when we talk about wildlife, most of the times wildlife have certain different types of habitats they like. Sometimes they have a couple different complementary habitats that they like. But overall, we have a pretty diverse forest. We're going to have more diverse wildlife. And then when we have these disturbances, like the brown-head beetle or whatever it is that's coming, if we have more diverse forests in terms of age of tree species and openings and all these other things, I think we're going to be much better off, both as humans and as wildlife. That's my speech.
I do think we can be more careful about how we're talking about fires. I just talked to a reporter in California for a long time the other day. He said, we focus so much, I think this topic tonight, resilience, is really important, and I think it needs to be that discussion about just like, we're not always trying to stop fire, right? We have to learn to live with fire, and we have to recognize just the benefits that fire has on people and different communities. And I think one thing that we don't think about either in California, so we have these fires all the time, but they're burning in the same place over and over. So we have these areas that are burning at much higher frequencies than they normally would, which is not taking care of the problem that we have tons of forests that aren't burning at proper frequencies, right? So we're so focused on these, because of people, of course, like money and people. So, but I think we have to be careful because that's been the only conversation, right? But what about, we need a lot more fire landscape. We need to be managing these forests and keep out forests or lots of things. So I think we can just be mindful about how we're communicating and try to get that messaging out as much as we can.
I guess I just echo what Brad said. These disturbances create complex habitat compositions, which really helps a lot of wildlife around here. Many of the wildlife that we have in this area, they evolved with fire. There's documented cases of, having a fire on the ground and mule deer, they've actually tracked them and they're just kind of wandering around in there, from hotspot to hotspot. In some ways, these fires benefit them. It opens up the floor, you get a lot more vegetation growing up, it gives them a lot more browse. It creates this patchwork of habitat as bad as saying, where you would have, birthing areas, feeding areas, places to overnight, and that kind of thing. So, for the most part, these disturbances either help or go unregistered. One of the biggest ones that we witnessed, where we see the downstream effects of what happens with fish populations, that's what Scott Roberts and actually we have been kind of looking at fish populations and mangrove invertebrates in the river and watching those changes. And they'll also repopulate given, areas where they can hide out and stash. They'll end up floating back down the river or, coming out of their pockets and getting back into the repopulated area. The other thing we have to keep in mind is a lot of the fish that we fish for in the Andes are dumped in there by somebody in the Colorado Parks and Wildlife uniform, right? So that's another thing we should know. We have a couple sensitive species though. The sandworm pepper crabs is a new species, and definitely one we're looking at and protecting. There's a lot of conversation about how do we preserve that population so we can restock them.
Like you said, fire does have, for some species has a restorative effect. So our invasive species, but particularly the weed populations, do affect fire ecology and change fire behavior, but fire applied at the right time and the right conditions can mitigate some of those weed species and promote the regeneration of species that are related and have adapted to those conditions. So fire is complex. There is resilience in the system. Sometimes where there's not resilience in our community system. So that's where we're going to start our conversation tonight with you guys. Referencing back to the question I asked before, what do you see as a community member as something that might be information you lack when it comes to fire, prescribed fire? What do you see as a potential for change in the landscape? How we adapt to fire? How do you feel like you're adapting to fire in the landscape, being resilient to fire? Or being creative? What are the creative solutions you might have? This is sending folks out with chainsaws and cutting fuel. So I didn't want to open it up. Emily's going to come up here. You get to see our collaborative actually process in play here. We use whiteboards.
We want to turn it back to you. What do you need to know? What
do you need to know?
If we offer this series again, what do you want to know? What information would help? What is weak communities?
I feel like that one of the big things, because I work for Southwest Conservation, where I work on their wildland fire group. I've done a lot of fire mitigation myself, so it's pretty new to me. I've only been doing it for a year and a half, so I'm still learning. But I really think from my perspective, I feel like education is like a huge part. It sounds like educating the community is a pretty big task. And to get people to understand what prescribed burns do, what fire mitigation does, I think that is like a big part of the issues that we do have as a community. So with that said, I'm just kind of curious, what can we do also for people that are moving into the area that are new, that never even lived in the mountains before? They have no idea what fire mitigation is, what fires can do. Because I've noticed, I helped a buddy mitigate his property by Vallecito, and it's just like, he just was telling me how everyone around him that moved there, they absolutely had no clue, and he's been trying to help his community because he was a smoke jumper, wildland firefighter, retired, and he's trying to figure out, what he can do, and maybe we can get people like him or anyone else in the community to be able to go out there and actually be like, he had a good idea is actually go out there and go to someone's property and be like, this is what you need to do to mitigate your property. This is like the education that you need to take on and the responsibility that you need to take on as a landowner in this wildland urban interface. So I think that's like a big thing. I think people don't realize what they're getting themselves into when they come out to an area like this. And, obviously there's a bigger picture for everyone. Like what I was saying, like Forest Service, whatever agency, private lands, like they all intersect and cross. But we need to, it's a big picture thing. And obviously, I'm just rambling on here because it's just thoughts. But, I think that's a huge thing, is educating people on what they need to do in this wildland urban interface because it's ever expanding. It's huge right now, and it's just going to keep going. And how do we mitigate all that and teach these people what they need to do on the property?
I think that's, yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, first of all, it's true. We should highlight, we got great partners here that help us with that. We got Charlie in the back from Wildfire Debt, we got Melissa here with Colorado State Forest Service. But one of the things that we've all, as partners, had conversations about is that we talk about forest work not being, there's not a one and done, right? We don't go out there and thin and we walk away and it's, oh, mission accomplished, right? Trees grow. This problem is going to continue to propagate. So we always talk about forest and health work having maintenance. But I think you're speaking to the fact that I think our education program needs maintenance as well, right? We're going to see changes in our populations. We do have to inform people and continue to do that. And so one of the reasons why we put this on, but yeah, go ahead. And you take it from here. You guys should talk about it.
There was a really important word that you used, which is responsibility.
Responsibility.
And I like that a lot because it's not just building the awareness. It's saying because you live here, you are responsible. And that's a key point people miss in the education.
Yep.
So I would like to see that up there.
Yeah. Shared responsibility, right? I mean, we lean heavily on the Forest Service, but we all live in this place. We have a responsibility as well. Charlie, what did you have?
Well, I just want to chime in a little bit on that, because my full-time job is educating homeowners about this stuff, and it's really hard to get through. Oftentimes, a lot of people, most of the people I work with, they invite me out to their property and they want to do the right thing, but really the big shift that I see is within the insurance industry, and I really think that that's going to be the only way that we see this large-scale change. I'm not optimistic that we're going to be able to pass land use codes or we're going to be able to go retroactively kind of force this type of compliance when it comes to reaching these mitigation standards. So really the insurance industry is the place that I see that coming from. And increasingly in this area, insurance has an issue, especially at places like Vallecito. And they're basically almost all the insurance companies from what I've seen have been implementing stricter and stricter standards based off of the Colorado State Forest Service standards, essentially. And since they're private companies, they can basically say, yeah, well, it's our money, we just don't have to insure you. So I think that working with the insurance industry and working with realtors to get those people when they are moving into these areas so that they know from the beginning that this is something they have to do is key. Because without that, people are going to move into these neighborhoods and then suddenly they just bought, their dream house. That's great, that's awesome, but they used up all their money on that. Now they have to come spend 20 grand on fire mitigation on top of that. They don't necessarily have that money. So it's about working with those partners, and I've been trying somewhat to bring those partners in, and I see some increase in those collaborative between these different groups, but there's a long ways to go with that. So.
And I would agree with Charlie. I think there's a culture shift, right? I give a presentation, I put a slide up. It's a picture of where my house sits from Google Earth. And it's a beautiful spot. I love it. If I knew half of what I know now, I would not have bought that house. Are you kidding me? I live at the end of a one-way dead-end driveway. It's like I'm way the heck out there. on the south facing slope. And so I think having our realtors be able to feel comfortable with saying, this is what you're getting into is a huge part of it. So.
Well, on the other side, that like private property liability ends up being protected publicly by, firefighters come in and so during the 416 fire, you'd see a picture in the paper of a firefighter from Georgia moving somebody's wood stack away from their house. It's like, well, that's not really hurting the insurance company or the homeowner. It's like there's this bailout that, people are being proactive because, well, not a single structure burned in the 416 fire. So, someone will get to it before it gets in the house or whatever. And it's kind of a bailout to the insurance companies as well, because they don't need to jack up rates if the risk isn't there. I just thought that was interesting that how much goes into protecting structures in the moment of a fire, which is the hardest time to do it.
I think it's absolutely, it was somebody like, I can't remember, it was somebody in the Forest Service who said, yeah, when the fire starts, we do fire mitigation.
Well, I have a friend who's a wildland firefighter, and recently he was like completely griping, and he needs to do a career change because he feels like his job is to protect these multi-million-dollar houses, and I was just like, wait, you know that was your job when you signed up? Like, unfortunately, that's half of the job. But we need to change that. That's not okay.
And that conversation's happening, right, Charlie? Like the fire departments are stepping up and saying, you either do the work or we can't really put people at risk.
Fire departments are increasingly becoming more risk averse, and they're basically saying, increasingly saying, we can't put our guys safely into this area, and we're not going to. So they're definitely becoming more and more risk averse. And one of the other things, just something that I found interesting and kind of emphasizes some of the slow progress being made with the education aspect with the fire specifically, is I had people calling me a couple weeks after the 416 fire saying, hey, one of the firefighters going to come restack my wood on my deck. And I was like, they're never going to come restack wood on my deck. Well, they threw it all out of my yard. Why aren't they going to come fix that? I was like, they did fix it. They threw it out of your yard. So things like that. It was just literally 2 weeks after this fire ended. They were evacuated for 3 weeks, and they're calling to ask when they're going to restack that firewood on their deck. So it is a slow process. We are making progress. That isn't to totally discourage everybody from doing this, but it is oftentimes that very slow process of trying to get those things to really resonate with people. Please, if there's ever a fire, don't call me and ask me when they're going to restack the wood.
It does bring up a good point and a great question as far as what's the education avenue that we haven't tapped? Charlie, Melissa, we offer tours. We create avenues like this to have these conversations. How do we get out to some of these folks that and we're not going to reach everybody. I was sitting down with somebody, we were talking about, our goal is 90% of the public. We'll educate 90% of the public, and people were very quickly like, you're not going to do that. Give us a realistic number. We came down to 60%, and even then, people were like, that's still dreaming, but we're dreaming big.
We have publications, and the publications are also available online in PDF form. So you're welcome to email it out to your friends, to your neighbors, to your HOAs, all of that. It's part of the Colorado State Forest Service. It's the little website down here at the bottom. Get the word out. Everything is becoming less paper, more e. So if you guys can get that out, that's the start. But we're never going to hit 90% below. Please get more.
I think also the kids in this community, so the people that are growing up here. So I student teach at the Brackenridge High School. This is like my first year here, and I'm in the biology department. And one thing I've learned is that earth science education stops in middle school, so like we don't teach that whatsoever in high school. My mentor teacher has worked super hard implementing AP environmental science class at the high school, which was just her voluntarily doing that. And we have one field trip that's scheduled to go talk to like one person from the Forest Service, one person from MSI, which is awesome for her to do. Yes, well, it's an off longer, so that would make sense. And it's happening next week, which is really cool, but like she's the only person in this community that is doing that on like a public school level. And I'm just like, why isn't this happening more? Because most of the kids in the high school, at least, are just like oblivious to this. And they've grown up here and lived here possibly since they were born. So, yeah, I think education starting earlier is better.
That's an interesting cultural point that this, if you were living here 100, 200 years ago, you're going to see a lot of smoke more frequently in the air. And if you were born in that sweet spot between Missionary, which is this demographic, between Missionary Ridge and 416, there wasn't anything.
There wasn't anything, and then 416, or Missionary Ridge that was the end of, this place used to be called the Asbestos Forest. Everybody thought it would. And Missionary Ridge quickly shut that down in a fairly large way.
I think one of the things that I was just thinking about when the first comment about education, I'm part of some programs that we're doing diversity and inclusion training in STEM departments, right, the science and engineering departments at universities. And one of the things that we found is the most effective is having, number one, engineers talking to engineers and doing it in your place of work, right? So, a bunch of faculty don't want to hear from someone from the diversity office telling them that this is important. But if their colleague comes in and says it, they're much more likely to listen and act. And it just made me think of what you were saying, and just like, it'd be really interesting to think about training some people from homeowners associations or other sort of like, where do these people go that you're trying to reach, and who is their peer group, and how can you train people that are then willing to work in those communities and like going to the communities? Because even, when you look at people that are here, probably everyone has their fingers still, right? You still have an interest, vested interest in being here, so you're still only reaching people that will actually come here. So, I don't know, just something I was thinking about, that this is something we're really working on with diversity and inclusion, and it seems to be working. So we do these lunch and learns, and again, it's like faculty teaching that we're thinking about.
So it's our fire learning pyramid scheme.
Yeah, totally.
In the back.
Okay, as far as education goes, one suggestion that, I don't know, just people are thinking about messaging is just to keep it really simple, and just a couple of points, because, when you're trying to reach a larger percentage, when the conversation gets detailed, it's fascinating, but it's hard to spread that message. And simple being maybe, 3 things, and just, so if there is a messaging campaign, that's just a comment to keep it simple.
I think that's, and we at MSI, we are constantly trying to figure out what's the balance, right? We'll put on an event like this, and we'll get both too much science and not enough science. All it's all feedback from the same event, so we're trying to walk that balance. I don't know.
It gets really tricky because these are systems and things we think about that are very nuanced. And you say one thing, but it can have multiple meanings. Like we can say forest resilience, and Aaron and I can have a long conversation about what forest resilience actually is.
And we have.
Yet we say this all the time, so therefore we need to have a common definition or framework in which we say this is forest resilience in this context. Kelley, I'm sure, sees this all the time. You're talking about some very complex systems with smoke and the components of smoke. And it's not easy to say, well, smoke is smoke. And even saying there's no good smoke is still a very simplistic way of stating your research.
And then we change that dynamic a little bit. It's not just forest resilience, we had the whole community component, and we're looking at all those resources.
One of the things on communication, it's kind of a weird thing that Summit County, I don't know, it's weird, but that was a technical term. It was a science term. But I think about it in a weird way because we have this chipping program, and so it's a program we've done for 5 or 6 years now, where the county hires a company to come around and you can put out stacks of wood up by the curb in your neighborhood, and they'll just, as long as it fits a certain, I mean, it's gotta be like, it can't be just like lumber or something, you know, or it can't be, cottonwood, you know, and so the idea is you clear your defensible space, and then you don't have to dispose of it, you put it out on the curb, and then once a year they come around and they chip it and take it away. And you know, from all the piles I've seen and the stuff I've seen in a lot of the neighborhoods, I think it has more of a value of education, because there's a significant time of year when you're driving around and you're seeing wood piles by people's houses and people are talking to neighbors about it, you know, rather than, I don't know if it achieves that much significant work, but there's a mindset there, you know, and it changes that. And I think that's something that it's hard to reach out to that many people and communicate with them. The other thing too, I was going to say about the insurance piece, one of the things that we've done, that some counties done, is they've actually put a new, in their building code, they put a new component in it that you have to have, the fire department has to come out and certify your defensible space before you can get a certificate of occupancy for a new building or a significant remodel. And so it's been a big shift. And I don't know, you know, if you guys would think about that or not, but I don't know. I mean, it only affects that portion of houses.
Ellen, Brian Kirby has put out a number of undeveloped WUI in Colorado. It's huge yet, right? It's like 75% of the WUI is undeveloped.
Yep. Folks understand the term WUI.
That wildland urban influence. And that in itself, and Charlie and I can have this debate, but I think it's actually, or it's a misdirect, right? It says like, there's this fence line, right, where one house is on the urban side, and then right over the fence is the wildland. And it's not that distinct. So it's kind of wildland influenced areas. It's more of
what was the statistic about it?
Is somewhere that 75% of it in Colorado is undeveloped. It still could have houses in it. 75% of that wildland urban.
So like you were saying, the Mountain Shadows subdivision in Colorado Springs that burned up in the Waldo Canyon fire, it was like 200 some houses or something, some crazy number. It was, you know, this was suburban. They got an ember shower, crazy ember shower hit that subdivision. These were like green grass lawns, you know. It wasn't the movie. What we would think of as the movie. But they were close enough.
That's actually a good point, Brad. It's like one of the kind of doom and gloom scenarios for Post-416 would have been what's called a Parkinson's cloud building. We saw a few of those big clouds blow up, you know, increasing weather, et cetera. And those collapse. Well, that collapsing of that embers, that ash landed here in Durango, which could have happened. And it didn't, thankfully, but so, you know, we're in an urban area right now, but we are.
Yeah, this town is the definition. You wanted to find where we come to direct.
So this has been an awesome conversation, and I hate to cut these conversations off, but we're running a little bit over on time here. I want to make sure we're like not actually kicked out of the Powerhouse folks. We're going to ruin our welcome here. Let's do one more thought from the group, and then we'll wrap it up here. Any more thoughts? You guys all, someone has a thought.
Aaron and I joked on the car that we should, you know, we have avalanche risk announcements on the radio every day. We should do a fire risk update every day. So that the conversation isn't just, education isn't just these bigger events, these are necessary, but just to keep it in people's forefront every day. This is part of our reality. Be aware of it, be prepared.
Like with the weather report.
Yeah, we get the weather, we get the rivers, we get the snow conditions. Like we're in red flag today, or we're in stage 2 closures today.
campfires.
And then we have a smoke map we actually developed in Mountain Studies that we're going to try and make available too. Because we'll have days that look hazy, we're getting smoke from somewhere, and people are like, where is this coming from? And so to get that out there so people can track where that smoke source is.
So as far as more information, please visit mountainstudies.org. Our website, we have a forest health space on our site, the easiest thing to navigate to. Some more direct routing would be through sanjuanheadwaters.org, our collaborative over at Pagosa. We're developing a collaborative here focused on the Nevada and San Juan counties, so hopefully the near future will have some resources online for that. LRA State Forest Service has a ton of resources, Wildfire Adaptive Partners has a ton of resources. The materials and the knowledge is out there, and I will say we struggled with getting it out to everyone who knows it.
So thank you all for being here today, for helping us to do some of that.
You want to make the announcement about the thing?
November 19th, 20th?
20th.
November 20th.
21st.
21st. So November 20th, MSI is having a fundraiser where Rob, the guy who
Wow. Incident commander for the 416.
Incident commander for 416 is going to be here to talk. We've had some really great local heroes that were participating and help carry that fire, and they'll get some recognition in this event. It'll be at the Stranger from 6 to 8.
Yeah, that'll be a fundraiser for MSI's 416 covered efforts. We will have more of an actual public open conversation with Rob following the night. It's like 5:30 to 7, I think, at the rec center.
At the rec center.
There is information on the email on our website about that. So.
We do have a form where you can evaluate this evening. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you need, what you'd like to learn more about, so we can, present more of this. It touches on what you need. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out. And thank you, Anthony, Emily, all of them aside, and our partners. Go.
I was going to say, one thing you can do for a big favor before you leave is if you're just sitting in a chair, don't take it with you, but take it and put it on that power.
That's a good one. Have a great evening.